Hello, college football fans. Welcome to episode 209 of College Football Throwdown. I'm your co-host, Alex Schmitz, and today I'm joined, as always, by my dad, Peter Schmitz.
Hello, Husker fans and college football fans.
Hello, everybody. We are recording this right after episode 208 of College Football Throwdown, which was our Nebraska-specific episode for the past 2 weeks of Nebraska football. So please listen to that podcast if you'd like our breakdown of the Maryland and Minnesota games and our predictions for the Northwestern game. This podcast will be more focused on what happened in the national world of college football for the past 2 weeks and the big coaching shakeups that have happened and giving our predictions for the upcoming week of college football.
Sounds great.
All right. So since we did just do the previous podcast, we still have our cold beverages from before, so we're not going to crack some new ones. You know, Dad is looking to trim down, so we'll cut you some slack there. And instead, we'll just dive right into things, which will be with what happened in week 7 of college football. So 2 weeks ago from when we're currently recording on October 19th. And we did give some predictions on the previous podcast, as is our tradition. On the Oregon-Indiana game, I predicted that Indiana would win in a narrow victory, 38-35. Well, you predicted that Oregon would beat them soundly, 42-21. And that game ended up going my way, a little bit lower scoring, but went Indiana's way, 30-20, in quite a dominant performance physically that I think surprised a lot of people.
Yes, I agree. That was the kind of what do you want to say, unanswered question about Indiana, and they answered it with flying colors. And that is, could they line up and be physical with one of the big boys? And Oregon is definitely a big boy in terms of, you know, their coach has made Oregon into a very physical football team that has pushed around, you know, every team they played practically. And so for them to get pushed around by Indiana was a huge statement by Indiana.
Yeah. And people remember last year when Indiana went up against Ohio State and got their butts kicked. And that was kind of like coming back down to earth. Like Indiana's, you know, very good, but they're not, you know, at that elite level. This is the first truly elite team that Indiana has beaten. And in fact, Indiana threw a pick 6 in that game. So a pretty huge mistake. So 7 of Oregon's 20 points came off of that. Meanwhile, Indiana's defense got 2 late interceptions late in the game, and Oregon was trying to make a comeback. So those 2 kind of sealed the game for Indiana.
Right. And, you know, that's what big boy football is all about, making plays, right? And being able to overcome when adversity strikes. And Indiana was 2 for 2 in that situation. And I really didn't think they would be able to do that against Oregon. I believe they were better than they were last year, but I thought Oregon was one of the best 4 or 5 teams in the country. And this was at Oregon.
Yes, it was. So that was quite impressive. On the other hand, there was Oklahoma, Texas. We both went Oklahoma's way. I said 38-24. You said 31-21. And it did not quite go the way we thought. It ended up being a 23-6 victory by Texas, and kind of it was quite low scoring up until the end of the game when Texas kind of pulled away. Ugly one if you're an Oklahoma fan.
Yes. Yeah, not what I expected at all, given how Texas's year has gone up to this point, and the fact that Oklahoma had their quarterback back and their defense has been playing quite stout. That was a very good, solid win for Texas.
Yeah. Well, and it should be noted that although Oklahoma's quarterback was back, he was clearly still banged up, and he threw three turnovers in that game, 3 interceptions. So, yeah, he did not have his best day.
No, you're right.
Yeah, and actually the real turning point, I believe, in the game was in the second half when Texas got a punt return for a touchdown after their offense had struggled, because they only ended up with 304 yards to Oklahoma's 258. So that goes to show you that Texas's defense came up clutch when they needed to to keep Oklahoma from scoring points, both stopping them and getting those interceptions, of course.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean that basically shuts down 3 possessions, right? And how many possessions do you typically get in a game?
Right.
Maybe 8 or 9, sometimes 11 if there's a lot of scoring or whatever, or a lot of 3 and outs. But if you remove 3 of those, that really limits what you're going to be able to do offensively.
Yeah. And considering that Oklahoma's going into that game ranked 6th, while Texas was unranked, right? The odds makers were really leaning Oklahoma's way. So one crazy stat is that for the third time in the last 4 Red River shootouts, Oklahoma has failed to score a touchdown. They've been outscored 106-9 over those 3 games.
Wow. Wow. And those are all games where the current coach
Right.
has been there as the head coach.
Right. So, yeah, there's definitely some pressure on him for being a great defensive mind, but not having the makings of a great head coach. I think that's kind of a prevailing sentiment
Yep.
over there.
Right. Right. Well, so again, how long can Oklahoma afford to go down that path? Because they chose to make this change, or didn't choose to make it, but they made the change, and then immediately made the change of conferences. And as we now know, as Nebraska fans, these first few years in this new conference in the SEC for Oklahoma are going to be super critical to their ability to sustain themselves as one of the premier programs in the country and in that league. And if they let this go for too long, it's going to be very hard. They're going to become the same as Auburn or Ole Miss, or in recent years, South Carolina or Tennessee, a good team that occasionally wins against the big boys, but isn't really a big boy anymore.
Right.
And that's not what Oklahoma had in mind when they moved to that conference, right? They were dominating the Big 12.
Right. Yeah. It's like, why did we, if you're going to get an automatic qualifier to the playoff, if you win the Big 12, why do we leave the place where we were winning so consistently?
Right. And because of how recruiting goes these days, history, as a blue blood, and having had a lot of winning culture in the past, it means less than it ever has in the history of college football, because now it's about show me the money.
Yep. Yep. Well, and I sent you a podcast that some of the ESPN talking heads did that was talking about James Franklin and the kind of the new world of college football. And that was a point that they made, right? Indiana's not a blue blood in anybody's mind, but Kurt Signetti, has the recent success there. They have a good alumni base that has money, so they're able to, pay the players to get the good talent. And that's all that matters, right?
That's right. Well, yeah, and they have, they're Big Ten university. It's a beautiful town. They have great facilities. They're not hurting, but their facilities compared to ours are a whole nother level higher. But 3 years from now, if they continue to have success under Signetti, and the enthusiasm of that fan base, having experienced stuff that they've never experienced before, they will easily be able to gather the money they need to make everything they want to happen, and that will keep them in the thick of it.
Right. Yeah, and then on the last podcast, we talked a bit about the James Franklin situation and the Northwestern game that kind of kicked it off, where Northwestern beat Penn State 22-21. Kind of a weird game where both teams had mistakes on punt catches. Northwestern had a nice drive to score with 5 minutes left, and then Drew Aller, Penn State's quarterback, got hurt on the following drive, forced their second team quarterback in on a 4th and 3. So yeah, a rough game for the Lions fans for sure, and one that precipitated one of the most shocking coaching changes we've had in college football in a long time.
Absolutely. I mean, no one could have predicted that sequence of events would happen, and that you would see a Penn State team that was, in overtime against, top 5 Oregon team 3 weeks ago, and then 3 weeks later you're firing your head coach. That tells me a couple of things. That even though he had been there for, I think this is his 12th year there,
Yep.
he had not been able to build any equity within the community of Penn State, right? You would think a guy who was winning that much, even though he wasn't winning championships, he wasn't winning many Big Ten championships or certainly no national championships. He was keeping them relevant. He was recruiting at an extremely high level, and he was keeping them, in the mix. And so you could look at that and say, we just need to tweak a few things. We need to make a change here, make a change there, and we're going to get over the hump, right? I mean, to throw the baby out with the bathwater after 12 years of consistent winning, wow, wow,
Right.
that's crazy.
Well, yeah, his total record at Penn State was 104-45. So to your
Yep.
point, yeah, he was definitely winning more than he was losing, and he got them out of it was his first 2 or 3 years. They were still under the penalties from the JOPA era and
Right.
the significant restrictions that the program had at that time. So he built them up from a rough position into being a consistent contender in the Big Ten. But to your point, their frustration was that his record against the top 10 teams was not good. His record against Michigan and Ohio State was particularly bad. He was not able to win the
Yep.
big ones, take them to the level that they wanted to be.
Correct. All those statements are generically and collectively true. But last year, they were one or two plays away from playing for the national championship. Last year.
Yeah. Well, that's what they talked about in that podcast, right? How crazy it
Right.
is that things turned around so fast that they were just in overtime against Oregon, right? And they had the momentum, as you recall. Things seemed like they were on their side. They scored first. They could have stopped Oregon in overtime and won that game. And he definitely would not be fired. It'd be a whole different situation. And I listened to a podcast that was by kind of a podcast like ours, a smaller podcast that was Penn State fans. And they talked about, they were more local media types, but they were talking about, all the good that he has done for the community. Like, I think
Right.
he's helped obviously fundraise, like build new facilities there, and also, done things for charities and things of that nature. So it sounds like, nobody dislikes him as a person. He has
Right.
a lot of goodwill there, but it's just that frustration of we've given him enough time, and now we're in this
Right.
new era, and we're seeing, once again, to bring him up, Kurt Cignetti get hired at Indiana and turn things around to this extent in 2 years.
Yep.
We need a guy like that.
No, and I get that. But when you look at the amount of money it's going to cost the university athletic department to make this change happen, by the time all the dust settles, it's going to be probably well over $100 million and approaching $200 million by the time you get all the new people in place. Right, the actual amount of money involved is going to end up being $150 million or something crazy like that. Right, and they're spending a $500 million on stadium upgrades.
Right.
So, I mean, they're spending money like drunk sailors over there at Penn State. And what happens, because you know that there's pressure on the academic side there, like there is at every institution, because the concerns about the flow of money from federal grants is in question, because they're not going to get the rubber stamp that they did before. They're actually going to have research in hard academics and not the soft side stuff as much. I mean, so the academic side's under some serious pressure, and so the optics of doing that during this juncture is, to me, amazing that they're willing to go there. But it tells you how exclusively they're looking at this, right?
Yeah. The buyout just for James Franklin is $50 million. However, it was stated that if he's required by his contract to get a job in the football world or the media world after this, and whatever
Right.
he's being paid for that new job, basically Penn State doesn't have to pay him. So if he gets another good coaching job that's paying him a big contract, that will decrease what Penn State owes him quite a bit. So they're probably crossing their fingers hoping for that.
But, well, yes, but just so you know how that plays out, right? If someone and I mean, if he wants to coach again, he will absolutely get opportunities because he's a great coach and he's got an incredible record and he's a great recruiter, right? So there's a lot to like about him as a coach, and the fact that he got fired at Penn State is a blip on the screen of his career, as far as I'm concerned. But a new hire or a new organization that hires him can hire him and then backload his compensation massively so that it's a competitive package, but pay him only $3 million for the first 5 years, whatever the time frame is on that contract with Penn State, and let Penn State give him the rest.
Right.
So his net would still be 8 or 9 or whatever the competitive rate is, with a little incremental growth, but the vast majority of it is still going to be there. So you're right, it won't be $56 million like he's supposedly owed. It'll end up being 40 or 38 or something like that. Still a lot of money.
Right. Yeah. That's the joke I've been seeing a lot recently, is that there's no better job than being an unemployed college football coach.
Yeah, that's right.
And then some other crazy games from that week of college football. One that you mentioned on the previous podcast was USC versus Michigan. Michigan goes to USC and gets beaten pretty soundly, 31-13. And Michigan was actually up on the turnover margin in that game 2-1, but USC just kind of played better than them that day and out-physicaled them.
Oh, totally out-physicaled them, which was a huge surprise to me. Just amazing. And yeah, the Michigan's inability to run the football at all was a big deal. And I don't know if both of these players got injured in the game, but USC moved down from their starter to their backup to their third string running back, and their third string running back ended up running wild on Michigan and just crushed them. King something is his name, and he's a walk-on, and he just ran wild on Michigan. Okay,
wow.
So it was like Michigan showed up flat and not ready to play a Big Ten level football game, much like Nebraska showed up to Minnesota thinking that they were the superior team and they were just going to be able to kind of walk through it like a walk through it practice, and they were going to end up the victors, and they weren't.
Yep.
You have to bring it every day, all the time, no matter what, and you better be working on improving. And Michigan didn't. Now, to their credit, they responded, but we'll see if Nebraska can. That's what's going to make the Nebraska game this coming week very interesting.
That's right. And then the other big upset was Pittsburgh over Florida State. Pittsburgh won 34-31, so continuing Florida State's woes. And interestingly, Pittsburgh was actually also down on the turnover margin 2-1, so they actually made one more big mistake than Florida State did. They ended up winning that one with 479 yards to Florida State's 415. So not a lot of defense being played in that one.
No, that's right. That's right.
And the Florida State woes don't end there, but we'll get to that on the next section.
Later.
So in addition to James Franklin being fired, which is obviously the huge news, a couple minor schools also fired their coaches. UAB fired their head coach, Trent Dilfer, and Oregon State fired Trent Bray.
Oh, okay. I did not know that. Okay. Now, Trent Bray, just for a quick reference, he was on Nebraska staff. He was a Riley. So keep in mind, Riley was from Oregon State, and he was connected to Mike Riley, and
Right.
And Trent got the job at Oregon State because of his time as an assistant there under Mike Riley.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Now, obviously, with the James Franklin situation, there was a lot of buzz about who's going to replace him, and there's a lot of talk about Matt Rule. Once again, we talked about that on the previous podcast, episode 208. But I think both of our feelings, especially after the tough loss that Nebraska just suffered to Minnesota, is that Matt probably should not be at the top of anyone's coaching rankings for this Penn State job, even though he has obvious connections there, is friends with the athletic director, but he just hasn't proven that he can win the big game. And if you're firing James Franklin, who has this great record already, you're looking to make a splash hire. Obviously, one of the big names out there that they potentially could have gone after was Kurt Cignetti, the guy we've been mentioning over and over in Indiana. But then just a few days later, it was announced by Indiana that they have extended him to an even bigger and longer contract than he already had, which was already quite considerable. So now he's being paid $11.6 million per year.
Right. Well, and that's the average over the life of the contract, I think. So it's going to progress from one end to the other, right? The individual amounts per year will probably vary, but and he's 64 years old, so this contract will take him until he's like 72. It's like an 8-year deal. So
yes,
that's the last contract Cignetti's ever going to need, right? He's going to do this until he's ready to retire or they fire him.
Yes, and apparently there was a stipulation in the contract that said that Kurt Cignetti would owe Indiana $15 million if he leaves voluntarily. So, he's staying there. He's not going anywhere. So Penn State's got to look elsewhere for their big coach.
Right, exactly. And there's plenty of candidates that would be attractive if you're an athletic director and you're looking for a guy that, again, that you believe is a really good, sound coach that has great recruiting credentials and you believe will be a great recruiter, particularly in this era of NIL and revenue share, right? If you could get a guy who was those three things and also happened to be, 40 some years old, right? That would be the ideal candidate, not some guy that's older than dirt, unless you can get the, like you said, massive hire, unless you could talk Nick Saban out of retirement or a
Urban Meyer
out of retirement. And Urban Meyer, ironically, is younger than Cignetti by quite a bit, actually, by like 5 or 6 years. So if I was going to go after somebody, that would be a call I would make for sure, is Urban Meyer. Now, Urban seems pretty happy doing what he's doing now, but I got to believe he's got a little bit of a bad taste in his mouth about the way that he flopped in the NFL in his last coaching job, and the embarrassment of the way that all played out. So a way to write a final chapter that's different than that might actually motivate someone like Urban.
Obviously his name has come up with every big coaching opportunity that has appeared in the last few years. And he's stayed out of it. But if he ever wants to, he knows he can get a really good job, like he has that reputation, even though he has made some personal mistakes and has some baggage to him for sure for anybody who hires him. But I think, as we've seen, right, people care about, can you coach ball? Can you win? That was something they brought up on that ESPN podcast, reference that again. You don't have to maybe be the same kind of program manager that you had to be in the past, because now these coaches get this huge support staff and there's no limit to the money they can spend on that compared to what it was previously. So the most important thing is, can you recruit well, and can you coach well, get great assistants and actually win football games.
Right. And talent evaluation.
Right.
Especially in this day and age of the portal. So that would also be a super high important priority. And I think Urban Meyer would check all those boxes. So I would go and drive the Brinks truck to his residence and offer him the world and see what he did. Because, yes, there's been some other big jobs, but Penn State is one of the biggest. It's a huge university with massive alumni, massive money. It's in one of the probably top 6 or 7 recruiting areas of the country, Pennsylvania and New Jersey, and that whole East Coast region, full of incredible talent. So you got a bunch of talent in your backyard, and you've got a great academic institution that is going to draw the finest students you can get. And you've got all the money for resources, for facilities, and everything that you could ever want. So I think there's an awful lot to like about that Penn State job.
Definitely. Um, and I just want to twist the knife in a little bit harder by reminding our listeners about, I believe it was week 1 or week 2 of this season when Dad brought up his theory that in this new world of NIL and the transfer portal and everything, universities would be a little more gun shy about, firing coaches and would try to hold on to them longer and try to play the long game. But so far, what we're seeing this season is the exact opposite: is that people are willing to throw the big money to try to get the right hire to turn things around quickly, and things seem to be trending towards maybe not as long term of contracts. So maybe you only get a 2 or 3 year contract as a head coach, but you're being paid more per year than you would have, with a longer term contract.
Well,
and it's just expected that, all right, if you, have the success that we're looking for in the first 2-3 years, then we'll extend you, but we're not going to be writing these, 10-year contracts anymore unless you've proven yourself.
Right. Well, I think with the recruiting calendar being a 5-year window, you're still going to see all of them get at least 5 or 6 years, but they're not going to be 8 or 10, which I would agree with you that they probably will be a little shorter. But again, every good agent is going to be pushing for the extension. They're going to be pushing for that to be as long as possible. And so when it comes down to the brass tacks, if you want the guy bad enough, you're still going to give him the extended contract. So it'll be interesting to see if the actual length of contracts gets shortened, or if it's more about other language that's put in there, like the one that you just described with Signetti. But yes, I will raise my hand and admit I was completely wrong. Here's the irony of it. The one place where I thought they needed to ignore my thought and fire the guy anyway, it would have been Wisconsin. And it sounds like that's the school that is taking the approach I was postulating about, which was to say the money, because the staffs have grown so bloated and huge, is so big when a transition happens from one coach to another that athletic directors and departments would be less inclined to do it because it just was too damn expensive. And yet they're doing it, and they're doing it faster than ever.
Yes. Good transition now into the following week, week 8 of college football. Sean Wright reported on X that Wisconsin is not expected to part ways with head coach Luke Fickell. The AD and him have had ongoing conversations about the direction of the program, and no change is imminent. How the rest of the season unfolds could determine what happens next. So, on the one hand, Wisconsin fans are certainly not happy with the direction that the program is going in. They had another tough loss this past week. But, you look at the jobs that are already open, right? You've got Penn State, and then as we'll talk about now, the Florida job has just opened up. It's looking very likely that Florida State job might open up. So you don't necessarily want to be looking for a new coach in a year where there's all these big names already out there, right?
True. That's right. And so that does enter into some decisions for sure. And here's the other thing with the whole Wisconsin situation. If I was the athletic director, I might be looking over my shoulder. Because keep in mind, let's use Nebraska again as an example. What happened before Scott Frost got fired? The athletic director got fired, right? Like it was a tumbler effect. There's sometimes some things that happen where one leads to the other, and this is in the case of Wisconsin, this athletic director hired Luke Fickell. Usually, an AD only gets to hire one head coach, one head football coach, right, at an institution, because if you hired the one, unless your guy left or something like that, but if you hired a guy, he was your guy, and then he failed, right? Oftentimes, if you're firing him, then someone's about to fire you. So it's a domino effect.
Definitely. And the rest of Wisconsin's schedule is not easy. either. So depending on how those games go, he could still end up falling regardless of all this stuff that we're saying. Because it seems like, especially now in the era where you're asking your fan base to donate to these, NIL collectives and everything, right? Having the fan base turn very toxic against you is something you really want to avoid. As I mentioned, the fans booing James Franklin. That's right. It was Florida. It was Florida with Billy Napier. They beat Mississippi State 23-21. So they won the game, but it was ugly. They didn't play great. And apparently the fans were still booing even at the end of the game, even though they won, which was a bad sign that, things were not going well there.
Yeah, well, they've lost the support of the fan base.
Yeah. So, yeah, obviously we didn't give any predictions for the week 8 of college football since we didn't do a podcast. But there were some big games. One of those surprising ones on the same Friday that our game was played, there was Louisville versus Miami. And Louisville won that one 24-21, upsetting the leader of the ACC, the number 2 ranked team in the country. Frankly, Miami played pretty darn bad in that one. They were down 4-1 on the turnover margin, and Louisville managed to go up 14-0 pretty quickly in the first quarter. So they kind of got off to a good start and then managed to kind of hold out with Miami throwing lots of picks when they were trying to make a comeback.
Wow. And Miami was like the only clear thing that was happening in the ACC. I mean, there still are the likely best team, right? But that league has kind of been topsy-turvy.
Yes. Well, now actually Georgia Tech is the only undefeated team left now.
Yeah. If you were to ask me who are the best teams in the ACC, I would not have listed Georgia Tech in the top 3. Certainly not at the beginning of the season, right? They might not have even been in my top 5. I would have been talking about Florida State and Miami and Clemson, and you know what I mean. Heck, even North Carolina because of the GOAT coach in there. And so that just tells you how crazy this college football season is.
That's definitely true. This was a big game in the SEC. Alabama played against Tennessee, and they won that game 37-20, which I'm not too surprised by. Tennessee struggled pretty hard both teams struggled pretty hard in their previous week, but Tennessee struggled more so. So I was kind of thinking that Alabama would control that one, and they did.
Yep.
I was going to say, if you didn't actually watch it from week 7, the previous week, the Alabama-Missouri game, I just watched the highlights for that, but just from the highlights, it was very entertaining. Neither team was making like huge mistakes. It was pretty physical football on both sides, both ways. So I believe Alabama won that one like 27-24. So kind of narrowly taking one out over Missouri. Missouri's a pretty legit team in the SEC this year, I think.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that, again, that's their coach is a coach that's going to get a lot of looks for some of these big jobs.
And now, having said that, they actually just narrowly won against Auburn, 23-17 in double overtime, in a game where Auburn's kicker apparently is coming back from an injury, and he missed 2 40-yard field goals in regulation. So if you just even made one of those, they would have won the game.
Yep. And, well, injuries are going to factor into all kinds of outcomes now in the coming weeks here, because injuries are starting to pile up for a lot of teams.
Mm-hmm. That's definitely true. And then USC, that was an interesting one, the classic USC Notre Dame rivalry game. Notre Dame won that one 34-24. But interestingly, USC was actually up 24-21 in the third quarter. I think Notre Dame got off to the early lead, but then USC came back and looked like they might be able to win the game. But they ended up going 3-1 on the turnover margin, and they gave up a kickoff return touchdown to Notre Dame after that.
Right.
Frankly, I was watching that game. I was kind of upset with USC's coaches because they made some weird decisions. Like I think there was a 4th and inches that they went for, but then they threw it when they should have just, ran it on 4th and inches. And it was a rainy day, not to mention that. So, why are you throwing the ball around when it's raining?
Right.
So, yeah, probably a frustrating one if you're a USC fan.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I, I mean, it was very much a back and forth game. I actually think initially the USC went up like 10-3 or something, or 10-7, and then it was 14-10, and it was kind of back and forth. And both teams had lots of explosive plays, and it seemed like they were moving it back and forth down the field, to each other. But both teams at times struggled to score in the red zone. And that's what kind of kept it close, but it was very competitive. And I mean that's a disappointing loss for USC, but at the same time, you know, Notre Dame was expected to be really good. I think USC is not happy with the loss, but it doesn't crush them that they lost that game.
Right. Yeah. I mean, Notre Dame's obviously a good team. And another big one in the SEC was Vanderbilt versus LSU. Vanderbilt actually won that one 31-24. And it was actually even more dominant than the score would suggest, because Vanderbilt basically was trying to run the clock near the end of the game, and they got the ball. They got a first down. They got the ball basically at the 5-yard line with still 2 minutes left or whatever. So they could have, tried to be aggressive and, go in for a touchdown, but they chose to kneel it out from there because they, could at that point. So they kind of left some points on the board there, or off the board, I should say. Yeah.
But they didn't they just went. They had the win, so they secured it.
Yep. I respect it.
Yeah, I do. Me too.
And this was an interesting one. Texas beat Kentucky 16-13 in overtime. A game obviously went Texas's way, but you wouldn't think that from looking at the stats. Kentucky was up on time of possession 40 minutes to 20, had 395 yards to Texas's 179. Archie Wilson was 12 of 27 for passing.
Brutal. And that's after they beat Oklahoma.
Yep.
So what does that tell you about what's going on? Because Kentucky isn't necessarily, at the higher end of the conference. So again, remember, this is a Texas team that was ranked 1 or 2 at the beginning of the year.
Mm-hmm.
So like Penn State has tumbled.
Well, yeah, and like you say, after they were feeling good, beating their rival Oklahoma, now you squeak it out. You're happy you got the W, but yeah, ugly game for the Texas fans for sure. Speaking of Penn State, not a great game for the interim coach in his first week. They had to play against Iowa, ended up losing that one by 1 point, 25-24. Kind of a crazy game where both teams had some major mistakes. Penn State had a turnover at the 1 yard line, basically right as they were about to score, and then Iowa went for a 67-yard field goal at the end of the first half, just to be desperate and try to get some points because they do have a really good field goal kicker, but then it gets blocked and returned for a touchdown. So that was a big mistake.
Yeah, big mistake. Oh my gosh. I'm a little surprised by that. I think I may have said to you previously on either a previous podcast or maybe just in one of our conversations that, because of this change, there's usually a bounce that the interim guy gets, right? Like what's happened at UCLA, that's a very common thing to happen. Well, Mickey Joseph revitalized us a little bit when he took over for Scott Frost for a little bit. We didn't necessarily win a lot of games, but we certainly played with more, passion and vigor and everything like that. So for him to lose this first game after, that's disappointing.
Yep. A couple other big games. I didn't watch the replays for this one, but Georgia beat Ole Miss 43-35, handing Ole Miss their first loss in the SEC. And SMU beat Clemson in the ACC 35-24. Another blow for Dabo, speaking about hot seat jobs out there.
Yeah, that's right. You're exactly right. That's a guy who's won 2 national titles.
Yep, but like we were saying before, right, it's, history is great and all, and Dabo really brought them from nothing into being a perennial power in college football. So they owe a lot to him. But it does seem like he's fallen behind the times, of where the sport has evolved to with NIL and transfer portal and all this newfangled stuff.
Right. Well, and that's the thing. If you don't embrace that, that's a problem.
Yep. Last one here, pretty crazy upset. Stanford beating Florida State 20-13. FSU had some major self-inflicted mistakes. They had an offsides penalty on a field goal that Stanford missed, and it was, I believe, 4th and 4. So an offsides gave them an automatic first down, and Stanford then drove it down from there and scored a touchdown. So you turned 0 points into 7 points from that mistake. And then
Right.
Florida State also had another play where they gave him like a first down on offsides on 4th down. Interestingly, Stanford's quarterback got hurt in the second quarter, so they were playing their backup quarterback for a good portion of that game. Weren't getting a lot done on offense, but we're managing to foil FSU defensively, and then FSU's quarterback gets hurt with 2 minutes left in the game.
Yeah, really severely. He got rung. I mean, he's got a concussion. He's got a head injury.
Well, yeah, it was actually a great run by that FSU quarterback to get a first down, and then he went into the slide, but the Stanford guy was already bulleting at him, and so he hit him in the head hard, and it was called for targeting and all that. And yeah, he was definitely hurt pretty bad. But that, to their credit, that game did come down to the wire. FSU got the ball all the way to the 2-yard line with basically 0 seconds left. So they had one play to try to win it, and they couldn't quite do it with the second team guy.
Yeah, no, that's the thing. I mean, you lose your quarterback, Alex. It's a rare team now that can do that and not miss a beat. I mean, sometimes you get lucky and the guy rises to the occasion or whatever, but more often it's the opposite.
Nothing as of Sunday when we're recording this, nothing official has been announced for Mike Norvell at Florida State, but it's clear that he is under a lot of pressure, even though, once again, just 2 years ago, they had their 13-0 regular season, right, and got gypped out of their playoff opportunity. So things have really turned around poorly for him since then. And then Billy Napier was officially announced to be fired at Florida, even though they won against Mississippi State. As we mentioned, things had not been trending well there for quite a while. He has a $21 million buyout and leaves with a 22-23 record in his 4 years at Florida.
Right. And maybe one of the, if I don't remember if it was his first or second year, but Billy had one really good year where he won like 9 or 10 games, kind of ahead of schedule. And everybody was excited about, what he might be bringing. And then he followed that up with an inferior season. And now he's had another struggling season, and that's what happens.
Well, and one interesting thing I found when I looked up his record, kind of like how James Franklin has that ugly stat of his record against top 10 teams. Apparently, Billy Napier was 0-14 in away games. He never won an away game.
Wow. Well, I guess that's easier to have that happen when you don't play anybody in your non-conference, which is a pretty classical SEC, scheduling philosophy for the last couple of decades, right? Because if you don't ever play a challenging opponent in the non-conference, then the only ones you have are the SEC teams, because you don't play away games in your non-conference, or if you do, you play somebody who's the little sisters of the poor.
Right. And one wrinkle to mention about that Mike Norvell situation, even though a lot of people want him gone, is that he got a contract extension because of that, 13-0 regular season we mentioned before. So his buyout is a eye-popping $59 million.
Wow. That might keep him his job.
Right. Well, yeah. The figure I saw was that it's going to be definitely over $100 million between Norvell, his entire staff, and then hiring the new guy, right? That's
right.
The level of money you've got to be throwing around.
Right. It's the Penn State scenario that I talked about earlier.
Yep. And then one more minor, I know this is another actual, the former Nebraska assistant, but Colorado State coach Jay Norvell was also let go today.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's right where we are right now. We're right near Fort Collins, and that not a surprise. They've struggled this year.
So yeah, now I think on the podcast we'll start talking a little bit more about what's going on in the conferences, because we're only a couple weeks away now from the first playoff rankings being announced. Us thinking about the postseason more. So as I mentioned, Georgia Tech is now the only undefeated team in the ACC. And the Big 12, it's currently BYU. They beat Utah in their rivalry game. And then in the SEC, Texas A&M is the only undefeated team. In the Big Ten, obviously, we have Indiana and Ohio State. So that eventual matchup is going to be a real clash of the Titans for sure.
Right, right. Wow. And back to the Big 12 that you just described. BYU beat Utah, but
Right.
Utah was winning that game early, and then BYU must have come back. So BYU is undefeated.
Yes. And I should mention the other big thing that happened in the Big 12, of course, was Arizona State playing against Texas Tech. And Arizona
Yeah,
State
and
won 26-22. Texas Tech, of course, who was undefeated. Yeah, both teams scored late touchdowns, so it kind of came down to the wire, but Arizona State just got that last one to win the game. And Tech did have a -1 in the turnover margin, so that did play out to be a pretty big deal.
right, right. So that'll be fascinating to see how that whole Big 12 ends up shaken out by the time the season's over.
Yeah. And real quick, in terms of we talked a bit about the Penn State job. Obviously, the Florida job is another huge one, with lots of history and money to throw around and access to talent. And the name I've seen today is Lane Kiffin. Apparently, he would be their top choice, even though Lane's obviously already at a very good school.
Well, but that would be one of those things where, yes, he's at Ole Miss, and it's an SEC school, and he has made it a job there. I mean, he's made it a successful place, so he's built it. But Florida's still much more of a longer term blue blood type program. Now, I just said that doesn't matter as much anymore, except that if I'm looking at the difference between Ole Miss talent and Florida talent, then Florida wins that hands down, right? In terms of access to players and people wanting to play at Florida. So I could see him making that move.
Yeah, we'll have to see. But Billy Napier's buyout is less than some of these other ones we've been talking about, but still pretty considerable at $21 million. And I don't know what it would cost to buy out Lane Kiffin from Ole Miss, but definitely isn't chump change. That'd be a pretty big check to write.
Correct. I agree.
So we'll have to see what happens with all that. As we mentioned, between the firings we already have had, there's a lot of big jobs open, and between Florida State and potentially Wisconsin and potentially Clemson, there's a lot of could be a lot of competition in the coaching circle this year.
Absolutely. And like you said, that might influence some other people to hang on to their coach, even though they want to make a change, and just wait and hope that next year's recruiting cycle, or I mean, coaching cycle won't be filled with so many big time jobs. Because you don't want to get into a cycle where there's so many other bigger jobs than your own out there that you end up getting table scraps.
Well, because you'll recall the year before Scott Frost was fired, I remember that was a particularly crazy year where there was a lot going on in the coaching market. And I think that was part of what influenced our AD to hold on to Scott for one more year, give him one more chance. And then we ended up firing him midway through the season. And it kind of worked out, that Matt had been let go at the NFL, and we were able to kind of snag him. So in that case, even though Nebraska had to pay quite a price for it, because there was that whole thing, if Scott had played like 2 more games, his buyout price would have dropped pretty considerably, but we chose to eat that to try to right the ship in the middle of the season and to get the coach that he felt he wanted.
Right. That's right. That's exactly right. And that has become almost a standard procedure now, right? A bunch of these guys are doing that, where that used to be very rare.
Yeah. Well, because I think they talked about that on the ESPN podcast about how you really can't afford to wait on hiring your coach until we're late into December and the postseason is done, because now we have that transfer portal window. The only one that now currently exists is at that beginning of January timeframe, which frankly is a bad time frame for college football. But you want to have your coach in and getting his guys in, and targeting who he wants in the portal or whatever, before all that, right?
That's correct. Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Which is also part of the reasoning why you do this early.
Yep. All right. So now we're going to give our predictions for week 9 of college football. There aren't quite as many huge games this weekend, but I'm sure there'll be some surprise upsets, as there has been this whole season. And one interesting game in the SEC is Ole Miss versus Oklahoma. It is a home game for Oklahoma, and Ole Miss is coming off of their loss to Georgia. But given Oklahoma's really poor performance against Texas, I think I'm leaning Ole Miss on this one.
Yeah, I would agree. But of course, Ole Miss just had a devastating. Didn't they just lose as well?
Yes. They lost to Georgia 43-35. I didn't watch that one, so I'm not sure exactly
Well,
how it played
it was
out.
close. It was close, and then Georgia had some good things happen for them at the end of the game, but it was nip and tuck, and Georgia had to come from behind. I mean, Ole Miss very well could have. You might even argue should have won that game. I don't know if that's going to inspire them or crush them, right? To have that kind of close but no cigar deal. So, but I would agree with you that Ole Miss is probably going to win that game.
Yeah, I will say I just looked it up. So Oklahoma did play this past week, and they beat South Carolina 26-7. So they did have kind of a stabilizing game there. Like, okay,
Right.
let's get over the bad hump we had against Texas. And that home environment is legit. The Oklahoma fans will be out there for that one. But yeah,
Oh yeah.
I think I'm still going to go Ole Miss's way. I'll say that Oklahoma's defense will still play pretty good, but we know their offense has some struggles. So let's say it'll be something like 30 Ole Miss to 20 Oklahoma.
Okay. I'm going to say 37 Ole Miss, Oklahoma 25.
And then I thought this was an interesting one in the Big Ten, even though it doesn't have the biggest national implications, but Minnesota versus Iowa, team that just beat Nebraska, versus Iowa team that is coming off the win over Penn State. It is at home for Iowa. So both for that reason, and because I think, like you say, Iowa has finally found some offensive firepower that they haven't had in recent years, and they still have their very strong defense. So I think that Iowa will be able to beat this Minnesota team that just beat Nebraska.
Yes, I think Iowa will thump them.
Okay.
I think Iowa will thump Minnesota, and it won't be close.
I'll say that it will be close to differentiate myself from you. So let's say something along the lines of 27 Iowa to 14 Minnesota.
Okay. I'm gonna say Iowa's gonna score 37 points and Minnesota's gonna score 10.
Okay, wow. Well, we'll have to see how that one goes. Also in the Big Ten, we got to mention this because we're from Michigan, but Michigan State is happening this weekend. It is a home game for Michigan State, though I think Michigan State is definitely the lesser favored team in that one. And then in the SEC, there are two other good games: Vanderbilt versus Missouri and Texas A&M versus LSU.
Okay, and A&M is undefeated, you said.
Yep, and it is a home game for LSU.
Well, but LSU's kind of been a little up and down flaky.
That's true.
Did they end up winning last week or not? I'm trying to think.
Vanderbilt beat them 31-24.
So I'm gonna go with A&M then, for sure in that one. Do I need to give a score on that one?
Nope.
How you're doing this? Okay.
Nope. We're just chatting now.
What was the other game you wanted to talk about?
Vanderbilt, the team who just beat LSU at home against Missouri.
Ooh, ooh, that's a good one. Vanderbilt's for real this year. I'm going to say Vanderbilt.
Yeah, well, I want Vanderbilt to win just because I like them. So
Right.
that definitely plays a part in it too. But yeah, I think you might be right there. Right, because Missouri had the tough win over Auburn, didn't look as good as they did against Alabama. So yeah, I think I would agree with you there on Vanderbilt and Texas A&M winning. And I also think Michigan should be able to handle Michigan State, even though
Yep.
it's at home for MSU.
I agree. I think Michigan will win that game as well. So we're all in agreement this week
It seems so.
for the most part. For the most
So
part.
so we'll have to see in degree.
Let's hope. Let's hope. The most important one, of course, is the Nebraska one.
Yes, which we were aligned on that one as well.
That's right.
All right. Well, yeah, this has been a quite an interesting football season between all the upsets and the coach firings and everything. I think it's proving that at least for right now, the narrative is that this new era of NIL and portal and the big super conferences like the SEC and the Big Ten, and everyone getting those big paychecks, it's kind of leveling the playing field, right? Like teams that you used to be able to just presume, oh, we'll be able to beat them. We're a big boy. You can't take anyone for granted right now. Everyone has some level of talent, right?
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And now some teams that used to have lots of depth and talent, not just talent but depth, they haven't been able to hold on to it. The Alabamas and the Georgias and some of those teams, they have been victims of losing some talent that was, got tired of waiting on the sidelines.
Right. Yep. So it's an interesting world, and I've been thinking as well with all these coach firings and wanting to bring in that guy who can turn things around for these programs. It is a zero sum game at the end of the day, right? There's got to be a winner and a loser. So even in the best case scenario, right, there can only be say 4 or 5 teams, in your conference that are either undefeated or only have one loss, by the end of the regular season or whatever. So even if you do get, a coach who's really good and is proven and everything, you know, it's no guarantee that like they're always gonna make it to the playoff or win the national championship. Like James Franklin, right, was like you mentioned, was just in the semifinal last year and was really close to beating Notre Dame and making it to the finals. And that didn't seem to count for much when it comes to what was going on this year. If they feel like that things are trending in a wrong direction, or you're not, maximizing the talent that we've paid for to get for you, we're not going to hesitate to let you go.
Right. And see, to me, Alex, that's very bothersome. Not only because of the money involved, which is absurd, and that should cause these people in the leadership roles to be hesitant, but it appears to do the opposite. But in addition, if you've got a guy that you've invested that much in, then you should be willing to find out, okay, let's analyze this. Let's figure out what's the weakness, where's the area that needs to be addressed, and then let's address that. Let's give you a chance to grow in your position and become a better leader, become a better coach, right? If you have a particular coach that's working for you that has a weakness, that we're, for example, for Nebraska, do we fire Donnie, right? Or do we say, okay, Donnie, your guys aren't playing aggressive enough. You're just not getting it done when they face Big Ten defensive lines. Well, how can we? What kind of techniques? What kind of drills? What kind of expectations and methodologies can we do to improve that, as opposed to firing him? Give him a chance to grow within the position. That's how leaders operate within organizations, right? They don't just fire and move on,
Right.
right?
But on the other hand, speaking from the Nebraska perspective, right, we had the example of Satterfield not being fired, but being demoted from his offensive coordinator position midway through the season and bringing in Holgerson, which did have a positive effect on the offense in that situation.
That's true. That's true. And I just spent some time with an HR and leadership coach, and he would tell me, because we had this conversation. There's a certain amount of that stuff that you can do, but if you assess the person or the employee, and he doesn't have certain traits that are needed for that to be successful, then you need to move him along and find somebody who does. You can't take the time to say, oh, I'm gonna try to mold this guy into that. There's certain things that you can change, but there's other things that it's virtually impossible to change it, or it would take so long. I don't have the time, so I have to move him. Right. And I guess that's the prevailing attitude.
Right. Well, for example, like we were talking about Oklahoma, right, and their clear offensive struggles against Texas. So is Brent Venables, maybe pressured to save his own skin? Does he fire his offensive coordinator like we were just talking about with Nebraska? Is it a situation where head coaches have to be a little more ruthless with their coordinators, even though they like them and, maybe they've been with them for a long time at a past job or whatever, but you got to be like, hey man, the boosters are asking for blood here, and I gotta give them something. It's a cutthroat way to say it, but maybe that's the reality.
Yeah, I would agree. That apparently is the prevailing attitude, whatever that's worth. But it's going to make it very difficult for people to build any kind of loyalty or stability. So I don't know how sustainable it is.
Yep. Well, we'll have to see. This is a big week for Nebraska football and a big week for college football. We'll see how the standings in the conferences shake out after this. If we get a surprise upset from one of those undefeated teams that are still left, and see where things shake out as we get closer into the 12-team playoff.
Right. I mean, it's getting close now, right? That's going to become front and center.
That's right. So we hope you out there enjoyed listening to this podcast. You can email us at collegefootballthrowdown@gmail.com. You can also search for us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify if you search for College Football Throwdown. You can leave us a rating or review there. We're always loving hearing feedback from the fans. So thank you out there for listening, and thank you, Dad, for joining me for this episode. Until next time, go Big Red.
Go Big Red.